sustainability more affordable. So one industry, fashion being the industry, but one area that is quite a question mark is the fast fashion businesses. So our panel today is all about, is fast fashion bad? We want to hear from you. What's your opinion? I've made my consensus about it. Have you made your?
Yes, but I am looking forward to hearing this next panel though, to see what they have to say. So what was your consensus, Yumi?
I'm staying away from fast fashion.
Yes,
I've made a conscious effort to sort of go for the smaller brands. Now, guys, we are joined by an amazing panel. These guys are from all the way in London, which is what's great about this virtual festival and connecting us all together. Now, we've got Justine, Head of Sustainability at Depop. We have ANEWKIND, Conscious Fashion Campaign, and we have Christina, founder, chair, CEO of Redress, and the architect. And our wonderful moderator today
is a very good friend of mine, Laura. It's so amazing to see you. Laura is a fantastic voice in sustainable fashion. She was based in Asia with me. That's how I got to meet her at our second festival ever. She was in Malaysia then, and now she was in Singapore with me here. Laura works on a slew of incredible projects. She does these incredible art installations, which is based from different industries, and create art to really make us question like what we're doing and question some of these massive topics. She did a whole series in Cambodia, and she's always working on social justice within the fashion industry, and we're super excited that she's tuning in. So Laura, I'm going to hand it over to you, but before I do that, just a quick PSA. When you guys are not speaking, if you don't mind just putting yourselves on mute and speaking so we can have a smooth sound. Laura,
I don't know if we can hear you, Laura.
Can we hear me now?
Yes, perfect. There we go.
Fantastic. Okay, great. It was clicking and clicking, and it wouldn't be a panel with me if there wasn't at least one glitch. So we got it out of the way within the first 2 seconds. It's fantastic. I was saying thank you so much for having me back another year. It's great to be with all of you, and especially great to be with this fantastic panel of women. This morning, I'm calling in from Montreal, Canada, to moderate this panel on fast fashion, whether or not it's bad, and what a juicy question that envelops just so many issues around sustainability, around human rights, the status quo of some of the most lucrative businesses on the planet. And we'll really be digging deep today at this panel with these 3 fantastic women who are really at the forefront of the issue. And I'd like to actually leave the floor to each one of you to briefly introduce yourselves. Given this COVID situation, I just feel like it's important for us to kind of speak from where we're at this very moment. So I'd like to introduce you all to Dr. Christina Dean, Ms. Annie Wells, and Ms. Justine Porterie. Please, Dr. Christina Dean, go for it. Let's start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I'll go first. Can you hear me?
You're good.
Yeah, it's fabulous. Well, I'm the founder of Redress, which is a non-profit that I founded 13 years ago with the mission to reduce waste in the fashion industry. So I've been working in the supply chain predominantly in Asia to reduce waste from a non-profit advocacy sort of educational point of view. And then more recently, I started 3 years ago a social impact business, which is a upcycled fashion brand and a waste management business, again, tackling textile waste reduction, but through a business model as opposed to just being a non-profit advocacy model. So that's me in a nutshell.
We look forward to touching on both of your the hats that you wear today. Thank you for being with us. Annie Wells.
Hi, everyone. My name is Annie Wells, and I'm the head of digital content here at the Conscious Fashion Campaign. And the Conscious Fashion Campaign was kind of born out of the need to bridge the gap between the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the fashion industry to achieve a sustainable future for everyone. So that is us.
So excited that you're here to give that perspective today. Thank you. Justine.
Hi there. I'm Justine Porterie, and I'm head of sustainability at Depop. And for those who don't know, Depop is a fashion marketplace, and it's the marketplace of the next generation. So that's where you can buy, sell, and discover unique fashion, and I'm based in London. Depop is in London, in the US, now in Australia as well, and it keeps growing.
Fantastic. So we're going to be talking about so much around, how it relates to impact, what the future of fashion looks like, the secondhand industry, what's coming up in that space. But I really want to kind of lay the land before we get into all of that. And so to start off, how dirty is the fashion industry? There's so much information out there as to what it has looked like and what it looks like now. I'd love to throw that question to you, Annie. You do work, as you mentioned, your organization works very hand in hand with the Sustainable Development Goals and looking at the connection between the fashion industry and those goals. So how dirty is it? And what are some of the most pressing issues right now in the fashion industry?
Yeah, I think the world has now been exposed to fashion's environmental and social issues within the supply chain and within production as well. But, we've been operating on a linear model for too long, and we're at a point now where the world really can't sustain this anymore. There's about 150 billion garments that are produced annually, and it's estimated that around 30% of that is never actually worn. And even worse, about 10% of that goes straight to the landfill or is burned. So it's kind of absolutely insane. And there's another stat somewhere that says every second a garbage truck of textiles is either landfilled or burned. So we really need to be better at moving towards a circular economy, but also taking a holistic approach to managing the supply chains and taking care of the people all along the way of the value chain. And, some of them, the fashion industry is so complex, it's hard to say what the most pressing issue is currently, but at the Conscious Fashion Campaign, we work with the leading global event conveners to advocate the Sustainable Development Goals. And last year, we saw a heavy focus around Sustainable Development Goal number 12, which is conscious consumption and production, and Sustainable Development Goal number 13, which is climate action. And we also saw a heavy focus on the use of recycled plastics as well. But one thing we would like to note is that the use of plastic waste is great to be reused and recycled, but there is a time and place for synthetics. Currently, about 60% of clothing is made from polyester, which is not only extremely toxic to produce, it's derived from petroleum. It also leaves microplastics when we're washing these garments, and they're entering our water systems, and we're actually consuming these microplastics as well. There was a WWF study that came out stating that we're actually consuming a credit card a week in microplastics, which is absolutely disgusting and absurd if you can imagine taking a credit card and actually just eating it every week. So we really need to be reducing our reliance on these synthetics. But in terms of what needs more attention, like we said, fashion is a very complex sector and there's always trade-offs. And also every region has different sustainable development issues and priorities as well. But as a globe and in the wake of everything going on and the pandemic, these issues haven't gone away. I would say they're actually more prevalent than ever. For example, the unfair treatment of garment workers in the supply chain and the #PayUp campaign that REMEC has put out that is seeking fair support of, which is really great. Diversity, social justice, and inclusion are also key areas to achieve a fully sustainable future for all.
It's so interesting. I'm glad you brought up COVID. I'm glad you brought up these issues of diversity. We're going to touch upon that, especially given the last couple of weeks and what's gone on globally. But the first thing you mentioned was circular economy, and I thought that was really interesting because it gets confusing in terminology when we talk about sustainable fashion, and then this very, very interesting word, but often confusing word when it comes to this industry is circular. So Christina, I'd love for you to speak because I followed your work for some time, and you have dealt for a while in the idea of waste and what waste means, or what waste can mean. What is the possibility around waste in fashion? And so could you maybe speak to what is circular in your own words? What does it mean to go circular? And is it even possible for the fashion industry as a whole to become more sustainable? And is sustainable equal to circular? Are we talking about the same thing?
Wow, there's a PhD waiting to happen with that
PhD,
question.
Correct. I said it and thought, well, we only have 35 minutes.
Okay, Okay, my view, when you look at a diagram of circularity, honestly, it can look really boring and really confusing, and it kind of can not welcome you into how simple circularity is. And the way that I explain it to my kids, and I'm going to really oversimplify it here, is that when a tree falls down in nature, the entire tree gets reabsorbed and reused, and every part of that tree, the bark, the leaves, the inside of the trees, and all those sort of biochemical parts of the tree are reused, be it to go into the soil, nutrition, to be eaten by bugs and things like that, or worms and all the rest of it. But so that is what circularity is. It's the usage of materials, call them waste if you want to. It's not really a great word. It's the uses of resources back into another system. It can be back into fashion, or it can be back into other industries. But the point is, we don't want waste. So that's how I explain it to my kids. And then to come to the second part of your PhD question, can the fashion industry be sustainable? And on the surface of it, the obvious answer actually to me is no. Because we know, you make anything in the fashion industry and it's got a big environmental impact. Annie, you mentioned some of them before. So everything that we make has an impact, and we all know that. And I can say that, I've been banging on in my head for 13 years, maybe more, I think, about the circular economy in fashion. And I've always actually thought fashion can't be sustainable because the textile production phase, the water, the pollution and all of that, it's so negative. Even if you do it well, it's still really bad. However, I'm trying to challenge myself to think differently. And the last couple of months have really helped me to do that, because we know that the real definition of sustainability, it's three things. It's three things. It's the environment, the society, and it's the economy. And if we just look at what happened with COVID, with many of these bulk big orders being cancelled in essentially in developing countries, we saw the money being ripped out of the fashion industry. We saw billions worth of orders being cancelled. And so we saw that if you take one thing out of this sustainability, it crumples. So by taking money out of the system, many vulnerable, I say many, millions of vulnerable workers, many of them, of course, are women, actually were left in an unsustainable position. So now I'm just going to summarize on this, because with really big things, I try to think of them in pictures, and I'm really being challenged professionally and personally to think bigger about sustainability now. And for me, this is the vision I see of sustainability. If you imagine a beautiful contemporary dance with three incredible dancers, and the whole vision is absolutely beautiful, and you're enjoying the whole thing and it works, but you take something out or you take the other thing out, it doesn't work anymore. So for me, I actually think fashion can be sustainable if we can honor, if we can have the courage, if we can have the creativity and, the passion and the money and the insight to make the entire thing work. Fashion can be sustainable. And particularly if you look at we're talking about fast fashion a lot here. Of course, fast fashion has an incredible negative environmental impact. But if we could create sustainable raw materials for the fast fashion industry, then perhaps this dance could happen where it's good for people, good for development, and good for economic development, as I've said. And where I think fast fashion and waste and circularity, again, it's another vision for you. I think the role of fast fashion is now to become a sponge. The fast fashion industry created a huge amount of this waste, both in the supply chain and also in our own closets and also in the landfills. And now fast fashion has to become a sponge it all out and put it back into that same industry.
What I like about what you just said is actually using fast fashion for actually riding the wave and the power that it has as an industry to get something done, which I think is really interesting. I like this dance. I think we should come back to this at some point, or at least if someone's listening who has a dance crew, can we please have fast fashion the show or the musical? So Justine, you work in reusable. When we're talking about materials, we put that aside for a moment because I agree that's a huge. We're going to come back to that because Annie, you mentioned microplastics. Christina, you mentioned materials and coming from the source. Justine, when you're in the space of secondhand fashion, What is your take on sustainability? Because at this point, you're not necessarily controlling materials. You're coming at it from a completely different way. You're kind of riding user behavior. So what is sustainability to you? Does it sound different than Christina's definition of whether or not sustainability can happen in fashion?
No, it's very similar. And I think one of the beauty of resale and why you can consider resale sustainable is because the material has already been produced. So the impacts have been accounted for. And again, as Christina alluded to, actually the most impactful stage of a garment life cycle is the production of the raw material and then their transformation. So because when you think about it, it's like if we're talking about natural fibers, we're talking about cotton. It requires land, it requires water, it requires pesticides. If we're talking about synthetics, we're talking about an oil-derived product. And we all know how bad for the environment the oil industry is. So basically, when you decide to buy secondhand rather than new, you're reusing something that is already there. You're extending the life cycle of it, so you're basically reducing its impact. But that's if and only if you buy something secondhand rather than buy something new, and that's very important to make the distinction. So I would challenge anyone that think that secondhand or even sustainable fashion is only sustainable if you buy something that you need.
So is secondhand or pre-loved in direct competition with fast fashion in your mind? Is there a world in which those two are actually healthy competition? And I say healthy in the realm of us trying to move this to a more sustainable place.
Yeah. Well, yes, I do think so. There are some reports and pieces of stats that go around that basically say that resale is going to take over fast fashion in terms of volume within the next 10 years. And I think this is for a number of reasons. The first one is historically, buying secondhand was kind of seen as was attached with a stigma. It was not a cool thing to do. But now with platforms and companies like Depop, we turned the tables, and it's seen as a great way to express your personality, find unique things that only relate to you, and that the next generation really, really grabbed it and use it as a beacon, which is for sustainable people like us, it's great news. So that's one thing. Now it's just simply cooler to wear secondhand clothes. And then there's another angle, which is affordability. We're basically competing in terms of price, because when you buy secondhand, you can get access to higher quality garments that you may not be able to afford in the high street, or even if we start talking about designer things that are supposed to be made better. If you look into the secondhand market, then you can access them, which means that we can start to compete with fast fashion. And then the last bit is around, now that resale is becoming more and more mainstream, people start to think about the resale value of items when they buy them in the first place, which means that eventually we will, and I'm hoping that we will move away from disposable garments that intrinsically are made to fall apart within a few months sometimes, or just after a couple of wears. And with the rise of resale, people will think differently even when they buy new. And hopefully that will lead us in a world where fast fashion becomes just obsolete.
It's interesting because for what your platform depends on, it actually depends on fashion companies doing their job and doing their due diligence for the materials to have, this longevity built in from the get-go. So it's almost like you are working in tandem with the industry in some ways, which I think is really interesting. Which is a really interesting point. I want to turn to kind of this elephant in the room, because it was it was alluded to in all three of your comments thus far that there is a long list for fast fashion brands in terms of what they need to do, what their to-do list is to move this forward. And so I'd like to turn to you, Annie, for a moment, because you kind of do, your organization does kind of sit at this intersection. What are some of the main, off the top of your head, what are the challenges and struggles right now for big brands as we present these demands, as we should, to keep them accountable?
Yeah. So, I mean, we like we've said, we're kind of trying to clean up the mess we've made over the past few decades, and the same goes for big business. So their operations have been in place for years, and it will take some time to introduce new systems and replace old ones. So it's almost easier starting from scratch because you have the ability to build the supply chain or value chain that you actually want. But this is why actually at the Conscious Fashion Campaign, we tried to work with global trade show partners to guide the exhibiting brands to use the Sustainable Development Goals as that roadmap to a better business and a sustainable future for all. I mean, there are 17 goals in total. They actually encompass 169. So they do really provide this roadmap for you to, you know, choose a couple goals that might resonate with you and then start to tackle the other ones as you go along. But, you know, it will just take some time as you know, there are such massive corporations out there that have many complex supply chains out there that they will need to rein in and probably simplify as well. So yeah.
I've always felt as though, you know, I guess I've oscillated between these two thoughts around, do we try to keep brands accountable, shame what it is that needs to, quote unquote, needs to be shamed, to get them to consider the Sustainable Development Goals as non-negotiable, versus them seeing it as a good business move. What do you feel right now, especially during this time of COVID? Are brands open and excited at the possibility that lies, you know, beyond the Sustainable Development Goals for them, or is it still something that it's very much the result of campaigning and awareness building and, you know, potentially eco-shaming online?
Yeah, I mean, I think a sustainable future for big brands means being honest and I think authentic as well. It means, I think, true transparency, and this should be, in my opinion, through blockchain technology and life cycle assessments and a digitized supply chain. I mean, it's necessary for brands to be analyzing the supply and demand effectively so we can diminish the rate of overproduction and truly commit to Sustainable Development Goal number 12, responsible production and consumption. But we also believe that we need to measure the impact of the products to compete with the small, medium enterprises out there that are actually committed to doing so already. You know, as consumers start to see this more and more, I think they'll be expecting it from all brands eventually, and why we believe bigger brands should start using the Sustainable Development Goals as a roadmap to recovery now. And one of the core pillars of the Conscious Fashion Campaign is education. And we do believe education on the Sustainable Development Goals will help bigger brands achieve their targets.
So you mentioned the T word, transparency, that floats around so much in the fast fashion world. And during the last few months, the Fashion Revolution organization, which works heavily in transparency and awareness building, they released their 2020, or rather their 2019 Transparency Index, which ranks brands as to how transparent they are on several pillars. And they actually ranked H&M as being the most transparent brand, which came as a surprise to many people. And there was a lot of discussion around, well, what does transparency mean? I mean, what is the definition of that? And how important is it? Does it mean they're number one in terms of being the most sustainable brand? Does that equate to each other? So I'd like to ask you, Christina, what is important about transparency, and is there, you know, does it leave out anything? Is it all encompassing?
Sure, and I'd welcome anybody else's input on this. I mean, to be transparent doesn't mean that you're sustainable or ethical. You know, I was trying to think of an example. I could be a very transparent smuggler. I don't know how you'd manage that, but my point is, just being transparent doesn't mean that you're doing the right thing. And I'm not saying that to in any way poo-poo H&M at all. I'm just saying the definition of transparency does not equal the exact same thing as sustainability. But I think where in the case of fashion, we know, we don't need to be retold this. It's a fragmented industry. It's complicated. It's, it's all over. It's like an octopus. It's everywhere. And there's subcontractors galore, and it's complicated. So I think as a number one starting point, you have to have transparency. Otherwise, you can't measure anything. If you can't see it, you can't trace it, you don't know what you're talking about. So I think to be transparent is obviously like the 101. You got to do it. It's so basic, and yet actually very difficult for many big businesses to do that. You can see I'm not a transparency expert, and I can't trace every single year that Fashion Revolution has been doing that off the top of my head. But if I were to give a gross generalization, we know that transparency is increasing across all businesses. They're still not good enough and all the rest of it. No one's good enough. I'm not good enough, and no one's good enough, and particularly in this world that we live in today. So my point around transparency is, yes, it's not the same as sustainability, but it's a damn good start. And I say fantastic to H&M for coming up top. You hear that and you think, oh, that sounds a bit contentious, but good for them if they've been that transparent and been able to, disclose their suppliers, and not just their suppliers, but what the transparency index is rating is not just your tier one garment manufacturers or producers. It's actually looking further down into the raw materials. So I think it's a great start, and without transparency, nothing. So that's my point of view.
Knowledge is power. Absolutely. It's an important point of view, because I think it was when that came out, the world the world who listens to this type of thing just split into. And so, yeah, a great thing to remember. When I think about transparency these days with what's going on with COVID and how that's impacted the world and the industry, I've been thinking a lot about, how the fast fashion industry specifically is such a primary economic driver. So for so many economies around Southeast Asia. And so with what we're talking, I don't want to touch upon COVID just yet, but it reminds me of, or it makes me think of what could happen if we were to move our entire supply chains away from this mass production model. So if we do revert to secondhand or upcycled, or let's leave it at that, secondhand and upcycled, what do you foresee? And I'll leave this to both Justine and Christina, as you both work in this space. What do you foresee happening to these economies? And can we mitigate any of the potential damages that this has, as we're already kind of seeing tidbits of during this COVID era?
Okay, I'm not an economist, and I just don't know the answer to that, because for a long time, I've been saying, and without much justification, so I'm being very honest that I don't know the answer, but the way that I think, but I could be wrong, is that I've argued for some time that, this doesn't actually answer your question about upcycling or secondhand. So, but let me ask, I'm going to make it even more complicated, because my point around fast fashion, as it's very contentious, is that, we want to keep jobs in developing countries. And obviously, if we move 100% to secondhand, then clearly there's not going to be an economy for garment workers. And obviously that's not even going to happen. But my point is, what we need is obviously to improve the quality and the craftsmanship, if you can even use that word in fast fashion, to keep sewers on the sewing line, but to be creating a better quality product, and to keep their jobs, and to make a product that actually takes longer on the sewing line. It lasts longer in your closet, but it still keeps jobs. So I'm so sorry, I didn't answer your question. But I said something completely different, like a politician.
It's fantastic. It's very political. No, it's great. It's great. It's very political of you, and I think this will add to. We're already getting so many questions, and I think this is fantastic to keep that ball rolling. Justine, do you have any comments around specifically? Is the secondhand industry destroying? Do you get that point of view ever? Is it destroying the lives of individuals who work on that front line?
I think it's probably the toughest question that we have to face, but I don't think it's a resale or an upcycling question. It's more a fashion-wide question to ask ourselves. And we know that Annie alluded to it earlier. we've been overproducing. Fashion industry has been overproducing. The biggest fashion trade associations have came out recently and said we need to slow down. So this is no longer an elephant in the room. So I think it goes way beyond our two industries. But after this, I think, and I'm going to make it even more complicated, like Christina, but I think I want to challenge us as well to look at the current model and think, is this something that we want to sustain? Are we happy with this? Like 80% of the government workers are women. Most of them do not make the living wage. Some people argue that the fashion industry is creating jobs and driving these economies. I'm saying that it's actually keeping them down and preventing them from accessing a fairer and more sustainable growth. So I think the whole model needs to be rethought. And it starts with paying people a fair price. And as Christina said, putting good materials on the line. So maybe it's going to be more expensive, but then they will have time. And we move away from a model that relies on fast and cheap, hence volume. And we go back to something more reasonable where these people have decent jobs and make decent living rather than what we have right now, which from my perspective is not good enough. And I don't think we should be happy to keep these models on.
Yeah, the fundamental shift, the backbone of it needs to change, not all the stuff on the top. There are a lot of questions coming in, and for the sake of time, I do want to address these. But before we do that, I didn't want to move away from this idea of rather shift, brands using all of this transparency, all of this, I guess, marketing towards the SDGs. Annie, you mentioned, brands picking an SDG and working towards that. And most recently, in the last couple of weeks, this idea of race and equality being at the top of mind, and brands have been marketing their so-called solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement on social media, countless newsletters, my inbox is full, or what does standing with equality, what does that actually mean for big brands in this day and age? And I almost want to also wrap in, there was a comment from Tammy Gann about when Christina, you mentioned, H&M using, or rather being the most transparent, they're now, using this as a potential greenwash tool in their marketing campaigns as well. So throwing in transparency as well as this solidarity, what does it mean for big brands right now to be speaking speaking their position on all of these issues?
Yeah, I mean,
I leave that open to anybody.
Yeah, I mean, I have a little bit to say about this, but it means truly committing. It doesn't mean having your PR teams come up with a great campaign showcasing your solidarity. It means committing to Sustainable Development Goal number 10, which is reduced inequalities, and having ongoing programs that support your employees and ensure fair treatment. I mean, it also means all of your employees have a responsibility to understand inequality and actually seek to make lasting change in the workplace and the communities around you. And what we'd like to stress is the importance of not only the external messaging, but also internal messaging in your company as well. That's super important to be able to not have the bubble up that we're seeing right now. So.
I think it's important to pay attention to the words we use. I don't think we should stand for equality. I think we should stand for equity, because the Black people and minorities generally do not start from the same line. So I feel it's about inviting those communities that have been neglected, left aside for a fair bit of time, to the conversation, because we cannot rely on the structure that led us in this model to produce answers and the right answers, because again, that starting line is not the same. So I feel that standing for equality is not good enough. And that's what at Depop we're pushing for. We know as a number of other brands, we have a lot of work to do. But it's about bringing these voices in to make sure that the new model that we create actually serves them and serves everyone.
So in listening to Annie and Justine, your answers, I've sort of forgotten your question. It's your exact question. Can you just give it to me again so I definitely talk to it and not just what I was so inspired by your answers?
Yeah, no, so many brands are saying standing for equality. And so what does that mean for big brands in this day and age?
Okay, yeah, I've got a point of view on this. It's probably not what I would have expected to have said 3 days ago. So it's that fresh in my mind. I think I don't have big corporate answers. I'm not a marketing expert. I'm really not. I'm just someone on the ground trying to reduce waste in a very humble, wholehearted way. But I think what I have really been shocked by, okay, so Black Lives Matter happened and everybody had their, their EDMs and their newsletters and, talking about their diversity and all the rest of it. Was it true or not? I have no clue. I genuinely have no clue from so many companies whether they actually meant it or not. But what has kind of very much shocked me, and please help me if you have a view on this over the last few days even, is that I feel that it's the role of the leaders of companies to be honest, authentic, and real. I mean, we're seeing a lot of mainly white, I think white, or perhaps forget the skin color, leaders who are really being criticized for their behavior in the boardroom, let's just say for 10 years. So you could have a big company policy come out, but who is the individual and what is the heart of that person to represent at the very top the values of the rest of the business? So I'll give you 2 examples, and I'm now going to give 2 quick examples that I've read about. I have no clue of the truth of any of this. I'm just, because it's so topical, bringing to attention 2 examples. One is Reformation. I don't know if you've seen, but the CEO, Yael Aflalo, has resigned. Potentially it's because of some sort of racist systemic injustice or racial issues that were in the company for a number of years, or maybe the company was too big and she wanted to resign anyway. But I mean, that's a huge, big deal. Anna Wintour's also sort of on the chopping board at the moment. I mean, she's come up with an apology in her own words, which was that she recognized that they had, Vogue US had published hurtful and intolerant material, and that she admitted that they hadn't been supporting Black talent. So, I mean, I guess what my answer is I don't know how to tell whether a company is real or not. And I think it's very interesting as business leaders today that who we are actually truly, truly matters, because you can't escape any of the things that you've done wrong. So it's about deep personal reflection to do the right thing, and that comes through in the company.
So I'm hoping some people who are in the audience are leading companies themselves, and this is hitting close to home and hitting the core. There are so many questions that are pouring in, and I appreciate all of them from all of you. I hope we have enough time to address some of them. There is one that was sent near the beginning from Anna Wernick about stopping fast fashion. We just mentioned, the leaders have to be the ones who are bringing this forward. It has to start from within. So if we look at the spectrum, government policy versus consumers boycotting, where do you see, is it closer to the right, closer to the left when it comes to really stopping this fast fashion model? And Justine, you mentioned, reinventing the model. So where do you see the importance standing right now?
I think we need both. Because we need people to hold brands accountable for what they say. This is definitely needed. And this will help inform the political conversation. In like a year or so ago in the UK, we had that environmental committee that made a number of very reasonable measures and recommendations to the government. Most of them got rejected. So if we want the government to take action, which we need anyway, people need to ask for it. And I think it's a balance. It's not an or, it's an and we cannot do anything without one or the other. But people need to remember that they pay with their wallet every day. So whenever you buy for something, A, making a purchase is a decision. Should you buy something in the first place? But B, where do you put that money? Is it an independent brand? Is it a sustainable brand? I know it takes a lot of time to do so, but people have power. So I think we definitely need both.
Yeah, Christina was mentioning the 3-way dance. I kind of see that coming into play again here. We kind of need a beautiful dance between policy, consumers, and brands. It needs to be everybody working together to achieve everything that we want for the industry, but we can't do it without the other. So it needs to be that dance.
Yeah, I would say that I have sort of given up on the power of the consumer recently, but I believe in it again now because of COVID and because the changing of the values and, you know, basically sort of activism is pretty mainstream now. Whatever your battle is, we're called to be activists. So I'm actually back up on consumers because we've had an awakening in our closets and in our kitchens as we've been, you know, stuck at home, seeing, feeling fear, seeing injustice. And so I say I'm up with consumers to be back in to vote for their dollar, although I was very down on them for the last 5 years or so. And on legislation, I absolutely think, yes, of course, it's the way forward. You know, you put in a legislation and business starts jumping on hot coals. You know, you put in something and they will change. And actually, you can see that right now. Obviously, we know France is going to ban incineration from Jan 2021. In France. But as a result of that, many French businesses are already putting in very good practices to be ready for that when it's implemented. But there is so yes, I 100% agree. And the dancing, we're going to wait for this contemporary dance to become alive. Someone out there do it, please. But the other thing I just want to say about legislation is you can also have bad legislation, and bad legislation just makes businesses, you know, having to do compliance and audits on stuff that they don't need to do. And so they're basically wasting good sustainability budget on stuff that has no impact. So not all legislation actually is good or worthwhile.
Yeah, shades of gray almost on both ends. And it's a dance between the shades of gray and all of the players within. There's a couple questions that touch upon. There's one from Naomi Bailey Cooper. What about fast fashion's impact post-purchase, which is interesting because we are talking with Justine about the secondhand industry. And Annie, you mentioned, you know, microplastics. And there's a question I want to bring these questions together. There's a question from Josh around the word fashion implies ever-changing trends and selling a certain lifestyle or personality that can be expressed by wearing it. Do you think moving towards a circular, simpler wardrobe and a largely garment and care industry in the long term is the real future of environmental sustainability? Sorry. So the idea that moving just fully towards a simple, maybe trendless, dare I say that, world, is that really where it's at? Is that where we should be moving towards?
I mean, I'd say yes, of course that works, but I would also say that fashion and people are not one thing. There's no one answer for everybody. And some people want to express themselves by buying more and more new clothes or more and more new secondhand clothes, whatever it is. So, I mean, there are many people that are going on more minimalist, high quality wardrobes. I mean, I hate to say it, but most of the more kind of fashion aware, fashion editors, fashion influencers that I know, and admittedly that would be skewed towards those who are more into sustainability. But there is a push for a capsule of well curated, gorgeous, well-made clothes that fit their life, fit their lifestyle, etc. So for one segment of the fashion consumer, that really, really works. But then there are many other people who really genuinely, creatively, really love fashion and its different colors and shades. And we need to respect that and not poo-poo somebody's wish to express themselves. And I'm saying that after many years thinking about it. I don't think it's right to overconsume, but I also think it is correct that we respect that people engage with their closets in very different ways.
Yeah,
I would in that way.
Oh, sorry.
Go for it, Justine. No, I was going to say that way might not be the traditional model potentially.
I would totally second that. I think we cannot neglect people who are creatives, who engage with fashion like deeply with their soul versus like there are a wide range of segments of people, and I feel that giving them options is the right way forward, but we need to pair that, as Annie said earlier, with education. So if you want to consume fashion, how can you do it in a better way? make it an intentional thing. If you're expressing your personality, that's amazing. Can you do it with crafting, supporting a local business, supporting a local designer that sources their garments well, that pay their workers well? There's a wide range of solutions, and it's not a one solution fits all. But at the end of the day, the problem is massive. Annie said it earlier. It's like a truckload of clothes every second or so. Like, there is a lot of things we can do, and we need to tackle that problem from numbers of angles. It's like climate change. There's no just one solution. So all hands on deck, basically.
Totally. I totally agree with both Justine and Christina there. And also, I think there are going to be more ways that we can consume fashion. Like, we've been seeing digital fashion kind of become a thing as well. I know it's not the same as buying something in real life and wearing outside, but the rental economy too, and the secondhand market. I think there are things that we can replace the fashion needs with eventually, and have that well curated, almost capsule type wardrobe, and more replace those fashion items with the secondhand or rental items, and maybe even buying a digital piece of clothing. So I think we'll see different ways of consuming fashion come out in the future. So
we have only 1 minute left, and there are a few more fantastic questions. We should maybe try to migrate our conversation after the panel to answering them via text. But I want to thank all of you. And as we leave, what is the one thing you hope to see? And I'd like to say, post pandemic, what do you hope the fashion industry does as soon as we get out of this current situation? Big question. I don't even know what I want to see for myself, so it's hard to imagine for an entire industry. But I think there's good that's coming out, and there's difficult.
I would say just think long term. That's the only way. I think if there was one answer, think long term. Any CEO from a fashion business, that would be my one wish.
Yeah. Think long term. Yeah.
I would say slow down, and let's think and apply. People took a step back from consuming. They decided to consume differently. Things on Depop got crazy. Like our numbers really rose tremendously, which is great. It means that people are consuming differently. So I think let's take those learning and let's not go back to normal. I think we need a new normal, and that's what I would advocate for.
And I would say let's keep working together. Collaboration has been beautiful to see, everybody coming together throughout this pandemic, and we really hope that sticks. Sustainable Development Goal number 17, partnerships for the goals.
Noted. I'm liking this dance. Thank you to all three of you, and thank you to our audience. That was very, very fantastic to see all your questions. And of course, the Green is New Black team. Thank you all for being here. This is great.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.